Greetings, brothers. This is Dr. Sidney Hankerson. I'm a psychiatrist and vice chair for community engagement at the Mount Sinai Health System and director of mental health equity at the Institute for Health Equity Research at Mount Sinai. Today, I'm going to talk about depression and symptoms of depression, and the most lethal of which is suicide. We all have periods in our lives where we get down, sad, frustrated, or irritable. But when I talk about depression, I'm talking about a medical condition, a psychiatric condition that is the number one cause of disability in the world. More people are impacted by depression, have lower quality of life, are unable to live the lives that they've been called to live because of depression than any other health condition. And because of the disability associated with depression, we would think that people would be running out to get treatment, but we know, unfortunately, that's not the case. And so today, I'm going to talk about some of the symptoms of depression, why depression is so disabling in the Black community, especially among Black men, and touch on some ways we can address this rise in suicide, which is often associated with depression among Black youth and Black boys in particular. So I mentioned that depression is the number one cause of disability in the world. In fact, significant disparities exist among African Americans with depression compared to their white counterparts. African Americans with depression have a depressive illness that exists for a longer period of time. It's more difficult to treat, and symptoms are rated as more severe than white Americans. African Americans with depression also are more disabled or more impaired when depressed compared to their white counterparts. And in light of how impairing depression is in the Black community, we would think that folks in our community would be running out to get treatment, but we know that's not the case. African Americans and Mexican Americans have the lowest rates of depression treatment in the country. And so what do we mean by depression? So there are 9 kind of hallmark or core symptoms of depression, and I'll briefly go over those in turn. The first key symptom of depression is depressed mood. So kind of feeling sad, kind of down or down in the dumps. The other key symptom is lack of interest or pleasure in activities that you would normally enjoy. So if you're a basketball fan, if you're in a depressive episode, even if your favorite team was playing, you wouldn't get any enjoyment or wouldn't care that the game was on. So depressed mood or lack of interest or activities that you would normally enjoy are 2 of the key features of depression. Other symptoms of depression are difficulty sleeping. So some folks who are depressed may have a hard time falling asleep, tossing and turning, and feel exhausted. Other people with depression stay in bed 9 or 10 or 11 hours a day and spend most of their time in bed. So sleep problems are symptoms of depression. Feeling guilty or feeling worthless or feeling hopeless is a key symptom of depression. Fatigue or low energy is one of the key symptoms of depression. Concentration difficulties, so having difficulty concentrating at work or at home, or having difficulty making decisions are one of the key symptoms of depression. And then appetite changes. So some people, when they're depressed, they increase their appetite. Others, when they're depressed, have no appetite at all and don't want to eat anything. And then what we call psychomotor slowing or feeling kind of sluggish. Some brothers, when they're depressed, they tell me that their arms feel like lead are one of the core symptoms of depression. And then suicide, actually having thoughts about suicide, making a suicide attempt is one of the core symptoms of depression. And that's what makes depression so lethal, is that depression is associated with suicidal thoughts or making a suicide attempt. And there have certainly been, in the last several months and in the last several years in particular, increased attention paid to depression in the Black community. Black youth, Black boys, we've seen in this past year in 2022, some very high profile, tragically, suicide deaths with Regina King's son and Chesley Christ, former Miss USA, among the most well recognized and tragic of these cases. And so for the last several years, there's been a startling rise in suicidal thoughts, suicidal behaviors, and suicide attempts in the Black community. And so as men, it's important that we know the signs of depression. Especially, it's important as men to know that although we went over the 9 symptoms of depression, in men and in our children and in boys, depression may look a little different. So instead of feeling sad, we may get irritable, or we may have a short fuse or a short temper. We may find ourselves lashing out at loved ones or at people at work. We also may withdraw, kind of go into our personal man cave and disengage from activities and events and responsibilities that we would normally participate in. We also may overwork. So a lot of brothers that I know, even though they're depressed, they stay a lot of time at work to try to work themselves out. But what that does is that can cause conflict and difficulties on the home front. And then often men will self-medicate, whether it's with alcohol, with marijuana, with drugs, or sometimes with sex. And risky sexual behavior can increase the risk of sexually transmitted infections and HIV/AIDS. And so it's important for us to acknowledge some of the specific ways that depression may look differently in men, and then talk about how we can get help. A lot of the work that I do is focused on reducing stigma and increasing access to care in settings like churches and barbershops, where men naturally get support. The fraternity is one of those ideal places to support folks struggling with depression. And so if you or someone in your network knows someone struggling with depression, or maybe they have told you that they have thoughts of going to sleep and not wake up, that's not something that we need to brush aside. That's something that as men, as brothers, we need to take seriously, and we need to change the narrative about depression. We need to change the narrative that depression is just something that happens to women, but we are more likely to actually complete suicide because we use more lethal means, like using a handgun or hanging ourselves. And so it's important for us as men to change the narrative about depression and get the help that we need. Thank you.